we're joined now by a man who was a three-time All-Star for the Kansas City Royals and from 1991 to 95 never fell out of the top five for saves in the American League. His 304 saves ranked 23rd on baseball's all-time list, and he was the stopper for a pair of second-place Royals clubs. Jeff Montgomery here today to offer his insights on the American League Championship Series between the Royals and Orioles, which gets underway at Camden Yards in Baltimore on Friday night. Jeff, how are you today?
Well, doing great. Getting excited about this upcoming series.
Oh, definitely. There's only one place to begin. As someone who spent 12 years with the organization as a player and half a decade as a broadcaster, how great is it for the Royals fan base and baseball that Kansas City is not only back in the playoffs, but on the precipice of its first World Series in nearly 3 decades?
Yeah, it's been a very exciting time. It's been a long process. Going back to the late 80s, after the team had won a World Series in 85, there were a couple of chances to possibly get into the postseason again. Never happened. And in the early 90s, in fact 1993, the Royals' former and their first owner, Ewing Kauffman, passed away. And that was really the start of the downturn of baseball in Kansas City because it was operated by a board. There was really no owner, and as a result, the organization just was in this downward spiral. And then finally, about 8 years ago, the Royals, I think the ownership had determined that we've got to do it a little differently here. We have to bring someone in. That person they brought in was Dayton Moore. They brought him in as a general manager from the Atlanta Braves, and he really started this rebuilding process that now has taken 8 years. They've been able to develop a lot of their own players, particularly pitchers, and now they're seeing really the result of all that hard work, and the fans have been very patient. They've really, they kind of bought into the plan, and now that they're finally getting close to having the opportunity to go to another World Series, it's really been an uplifting situation for the entire city.
Mm-hmm. Give us the inside scoop as someone who's been there all year long. What was the atmosphere at Kauffman Stadium like as the Royals were coming back against Oakland that ultimately overtook them in the wild card game?
Well, the Oakland game was one of the most incredible baseball games I think anyone could ever have be part of. Watching the way that the game unfolded, the Royals seemingly on the mat a number of times. They're down 4 runs going into the 8th inning with John Lester, an ace on the hill, and they were able to find a way to scratch themselves back into it, and it ended up being a 4.5-hour game, but they win the game, and it's just an incredible game. And the city then was aware, hey, we're going to have at least 5 more playoff games. So then they are able to go into the series in the ALDS against the Angels, and they sweep the Angels, a team that had the best record in the American League, a team that seemingly was going to be unbeatable. But the Royals, they went to it with a lot of confidence, and I think winning that Oakland game was really a huge difference maker for them because it then gave them the chance to go into a series to where they're not going to be a one-and-done situation. And this team really is built better for a 5 and even a 7-game series than it is a 1-game series. The Royals don't necessarily have any true superstars on the team. Right. They don't have any guys that they don't have any pitchers who would probably be aces on most other teams. So they're able to do it just with consistency up and down the lineup. They do little things. They manufacture runs, play very good defense, and they're just a sound ball club. But sometimes when you run against a team that has, a formerly like a Justin Verlander or a Cy Young type guy on the hill, you may have worked all season, 162 games to get that at 1-game playoff, and the Royals had that against John Lester.
Right.
And then your season possibly is over. And the fact that they were able to win that game, it was just an incredible confidence booster, I think, for this team.
Eric Hosmer has been a highly touted young player for the Royals and done a solid job at the Major League level, but after posting a .270, .398, .716 slash line during the regular year, Hosmer has exploded for a .500, .632, .1143 line in October, and he plays a game with intense passion. Though he can't keep up this incredible pace, of course, the rest of the country is starting to get a clear picture of the presence Hosmer brings to the table for Kansas City, aren't they?
Yeah, and he's really, if you're going to say who has the ability on this team to be the one-man wrecking crew, it would be Eric Hosmer. He has the ability to hit for average. He's can obviously hit for power, but he goes through stretches where he really struggles, just sometimes with even making contact. He gets a little too aggressive with the swing, and he gets maybe a little too anxious at the plate, and as a result, he gets himself out a lot. But he's in that stage right now where he is on fire. He's not missing hardly any pitches that are in that hitting zone, and when you put a few guys on base ahead of him, gosh, he has the ability to do a lot of damage. So he's probably that one guy that got hot at the right time.
Mm-hmm. I've long felt that speed is baseball's secret weapon because most teams simply don't have it. The Royals do, though. And now with the pitching and defense they have, they're kind of cut from the same cloth as the early to mid-'80s Cardinals, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're a team that they can beat you really kind of like three different ways. They can beat you with their speed, they can beat you with their pitching, and they can beat you with their defense. And when this team finds the ability to put some runs on the board, that added element of scoring more than a couple of runs in a game, they really are difficult to beat. And that's just one of the marks of this team. They use that speed in order to find ways to manufacture runs. And there was one game earlier in the season. They had a runner on second base. They're down by a run. They have a runner on second base. He's stealing at third, and there was a wild pitch. He actually scored on the play. So the next batter gets a hit. The pinch run. They put a runner in. He's still second base. Now he's stealing third base, and there's a chop ball in the infield. Ball never leaves the infield, and he scores a run to win the game. So they have two runners on second, and they score on balls that are not even hit out of the infield. So they use that speed. Sometimes you see teams that have good speed, they steal bases, and I guess I'll call them meaningless, stolen bases. This team uses stolen bases to really manufacture runs.
So game one of the ALCS is Friday night. The Royals will send James Shields to the mound to face the Orioles. Kansas City was 4-3 against Baltimore during the regular season and continued their strong road performance for the first two road games at Anaheim in the LDS like you talked about. How do you like Shields against the O's in game one?
Well, the big key for James Shields is getting through the first inning. If he's able to go out and have a good first inning of the ball game, he always is pitching deep in the game. Rarely does anybody get to him after he gets established on the mound. That's always been really the biggest factor for him. Now, he might give up 3 runs in the first, and he may go 7 shutout innings after that. But the real key for him is getting through that first inning. And if you look at this Orioles team, they got Adam Jones batting third. He's an all-star center fielder, very good defensive player, but he can do some things with the bat. But then Nelson Cruz is like that postseason phenom. So I think those two guys, those will be the keys for James Shields as far as not letting either one of those two players beat you. And I know as a pitcher, I would always go into a series looking at that one or two guy on that roster that under any circumstances will this guy, will I let this guy beat me? So even if you got to walk a guy with bases loaded, I think you just have to say you cannot let this guy beat me in any situation.
Well, we know the Royals are going to run, but will they be able to be successful throughout the series on Caleb Joseph and Nick Hundley?
Well, I think so. They pick their spots. A lot of times it's really based more, on the pitcher who's on the mound than it is the catcher, and so they know who the guys are that they can run against. And when they have those matchups and those situations, they exploit it. They just go right at it. They don't stop. They just keep going, and it doesn't matter which guy it is on the team, other than probably Billy Butler. They all take a shot at it. So it'll be interesting to see how the Orioles adjust to that speed game. Now we saw the Angels. They seem to feel like they had it figured out, but the Royals still were able to steal bases against them. So that's just something that it creates another challenge for a team. And whether you're able to steal bases or you're not able to steal bases, at least that threat of being able to steal a base, it changes the way that the other team has to approach you.
All right, let's break it down. Who do you give the advantage to heading into the series? We'll start with lineups. Baltimore has reached the LCS without the services of Matt Wieters and Chris Davis, who's not going to be on the ALCS roster. He still has 5 games to serve on his suspension. Well, like you talked about, the Royals are scrappers as a lineup. Who do you have the advantage? Who has the upper hand as far as lineup in this series?
Well, if the Royals are able to stay hot, I say they're fairly even. As far as Eric Hosmer in particular, if he stays hot, then I think it's a fairly even matchup. If he goes cold, then the Orioles have a definite advantage as far as the lineup.
And how about defense?
Well, the Orioles are a very good defensive team, but the Royals have an outfield that is probably as good of an defensive outfield as you'll find in baseball. They've made just incredible catches, especially in this postseason, to save runs and to help their pitchers. And then you couple that with I think one of the top 2 or 3 catchers in the American League, and Salvador Perez behind the plate. Alcides Escobar is a very underrated shortstop. And you just look at their defense. Hosmer and Moustakas over at third base, very solid. And Omar Infante is just he's a good defensive second baseman. So I think you got to give the edge a little bit on defense to Kansas City.
And how about the rotation? I mean, you talked about it. There's not really that one big name like a Justin Verlander or Clayton Kershaw for either side in this series. But when it comes to the rotation, who do you give the upper hand to?
Yeah, they're pretty, they're pretty even as far as if you look at the rotation. But I think the fact that the Royals have two young, hard-throwing pitchers in Yordano Ventura and Danny Duffy, and I think Danny Duffy probably will start. I know earlier in the season, Yordano Ventura went 8 innings against the Orioles, shut him out for 8 innings. Duffy went 7 innings against the Orioles and shut him out. So those two young, hard-throwing pitchers probably give the Royals a little bit of an advantage with regards to the rotation. I think Shields is, he's the guy that you can count on. He's going to go out there. He has the experience. But I think those two young pitchers I just mentioned, in Ventura and Duffy, they maybe tilt the scales a little bit in the Royals' favor.
All right, getting away from the rotation, the guys who are going to come in after that. How about bullpen?
Well, if you just take the last three guys in the Royals bullpen, and Kelvin Herrera, Wade Davis, and Greg Holland, I'd probably give the advantage to the Royals. I think Holland's probably the premier closer right now in the American League. Wade Davis just had one of the most incredible seasons of any relief pitcher in baseball history. Kelvin Herrera is a guy that had to come out of a game in Anaheim after one pitch, but he came back and pitched in the last game and looked fine. Had a tight, almost a cramp in his forearm. So those last three, I say I give the advantage to the Royals. But if you look at the entire bullpen, I think the Baltimore bullpen maybe has a little more depth with regards to the number of quality arms they have in there, the quality performance that they're going to get from their bullpen. Royals, fortunately, don't need to go to that bullpen until about the 7th inning. If they get to the 7th inning, I give it to the Royals. If you have to go earlier, I'd probably give it to the Orioles.
All right, then what about bench? I mean, in the American League game, the bench isn't as critical as in the National League. They don't get utilized quite as often. Teams with the designated hitters stick with what they use. But in the playoffs, the games always come down to the last couple of innings. They're always close. So who do you give the advantage to as far as bench?
Well, the Royals got a couple speed guys on the bench, and that's probably it's not a traditional way of thinking. It's not a guy that's going to be in the bench that's going to come in and pop a 3-run home run for you. It's a guy that they're going to take off the bench. We're going to put him on first base, and they're going to expect him to steal second base, and they're going to expect him to possibly steal third base to manufacture that run. So it's a little different thinking. So I would say it's because of that. I would probably give the bench the advantage to the Orioles.
And then finally, what about the manager? I mean, obviously on paper, most people would probably think Buck Showalter has a huge upper hand, but how do you see that coming down to as far as the X's and O's?
Yeah, I think Buck is one of the ultimate tacticians in the game. He understands what other managers are going to do, and he can kind of think alongside those other managers. Ned Yost is a solid guy. He pushes the buttons the right way the majority of the time. There have been a couple of situations. One of them, as a matter of fact, in that wild card game where he brought in Yordano Ventura, who was a starting pitcher, in for James Shields in the 6th inning with 2 runners on base, and the second pitch I believe he threw, he had a home run. So it was definitely not the right move when you have James Shields on the mound and you bring in a young 23-year-old kid who is not even a relief pitcher into that environment. Highly criticized. But there were a couple of other moves during the season that even Ned said, it was my mistake. I made a mistake and it cost us a game. So I think probably as far as the managers, I got to go with Buck Showalter and his experience in managing, the number of years he's managed, as well as the big games he's managed.
Yeah, speaking of the managerial aspect, just keep on with that for a second here. Ned Yost has taken his fair share of scrutiny throughout the regular season, the stretch run, like you talked about with the Yordano Ventura situation, the wildcard game. Give us your impression of Ned Yost as a skipper.
Well, he's done a really good job in keeping this team together. And I think as a manager, you got a couple of responsibilities, one of which is finding best situations for your players to play in. Another one is find ways to keep your team really on the same page. Try to eliminate the dissension and try to keep guys really kind of marching in the same direction. He's done a really good job at that. There have been a number of times over the last, even the last couple or 3 years where the team has been, they've been down, they've been on the mat, and he's found a way to, kind of keep his calm, stay with them, allow them to kind of get back up and then get marching in the right direction again. So he's done a really nice job in that regard. But you're right, he does get scrutinized heavily for his tactical decisions and sometimes mistakes. But I've never seen a manager that has not. That's one of the faults of the manager. One thing I will say about Ned Yost and his staff, about a month ago, they made the decision, almost turn the lineup upside down. They put Alcides Escobar from the ninth hitter to the first hitter. They dropped Omar Infante from the 2 hole down to the 7 hole. So they made some changes with that lineup, and it really worked. It's, every day managers across baseball get criticized for the lineup they post in the dugout every night. There's always somebody who has a problem with what that lineup is, and same with Ned Yost and the fans in Kansas City. There's always some criticism over his lineup, but I will credit him for making that really significant change, again about a month ago, and it has really paid huge dividends.
All right, bottom line, how far do you see this series going, and who wins the pennant?
Gosh, I think whoever wins the first game is going to win it. So tomorrow night's game obviously is huge. And I just really like the Royals in a long series. I just think that they're built for a longer series. I like their depth, and if they can find a way to get just 3 or 4 runs, they usually win ball games. So it's not too much to ask here in a ballpark in Baltimore where the ball seems to carry very nicely, and it almost brings out the best in a lot of Royals hitters who are used to hitting in Kauffman Stadium, which is a very pitcher-friendly ballpark. When they get in ballparks like Baltimore, it seems like it brings out the best in them, and they have played great on the road this year too. So I got to give the advantage to the Kansas City Royals.
All right, Jeff Montgomery, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to speak with us here today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
All right, enjoy the series.